So I want to start with you all kind of where we've started elsewhere during the day, because it is obviously the big question on the table. And that is, how does the outcome of the presidential election affect politics in Texas? And I think most of you have been here, or at least a few of you have been here during the day, and we have a little primary data now. So what do you think? Remember, you were not only here, but also on the road with both campaigns.
Right.
But now that you're back and survived it, what are you seeing?
Well, it's interesting because there's concern really from optimism and concern from both parties for a couple of reasons. And, here in Texas, it will be interesting to see sort of how the legislature, the Republican-controlled legislature and the governor, how they view Trump in terms of getting their business done. And, for 8 years, you had President Obama, who was the boogeyman, who was, Greg Abbott said as Attorney General, he woke up every morning thinking of a different way to sue President Obama. Well, now you have President Trump, who, if you believe him, says that he's committed to border security, he's committed to building the wall, he's committed to dismantling the Affordable Care Act. If he does all of that, then you have a bunch of happy, Republican lawmakers here. Well, what happens if he doesn't? What happens with border security? I mean, will border security be cut here? And so all those questions, I think, remain to be answered, and we'll have to see. On the Democratic side, there's a sense of dread, but there's also a sense of opportunity for them. They see how Hillary Clinton did in the presidential election. In Harris County, for instance, Democrats did well there. In Dallas County, they made gains, picked up one House seat. Quite frankly, could have picked up a little more with stronger candidates, a better plan. But I think they see an opportunity to gauge whether the gains made in the last cycle were those gains real, or was it just a one-time Trump phenomenon? But they see the numbers there and something to build on. So this legislative session is sort of the pre-silly season, right? The bridge toward the presidential election and the Texas elections. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
We'll come back to your subtle dig at the Democrats in Dallas there, but I do want to flag it in case anybody missed it.
They did a good job.
Jonathan, you covered some of the interesting Texas currents in this election. What do you see as the aftermath?
Well, you will accuse me of being obsessive, but I think my obsession is well-directed. As a result of this election, Austin is now the center of the media universe, not because of the Statesman or the Morning News or the Texas Monthly or even the Texas Tribune, but because Alex Jones broadcasts a couple of miles from here. And every time Donald Trump says something and you go, where did that come from? It came directly from Alex Jones. So his most recent, no, this is not even.
Would you give us a couple examples?
You say it over here, it comes out over here.
No. I mean, his tweet on Sunday about how he won the popular vote because if you took away the illegal immigrants who voted, that came straight from Alex Jones directly. And Roger Stone, who is sort of going to be the impresario of the public opinion for Trump, he spent election night next to Alex Jones broadcasting from Austin. And he is the interface between the public and Trump. Alex Jones, you will know if Trump has gone off the rails when Alex Jones turns on him. You will know what he's thinking based on every theory that Alex Jones puts forth. I mean, I expect within 4 years that Trump will come to Austin to celebrate the anniversary of Texas's brave and heroic resistance to the Jade Helm takeover. And you will be at your peril if you decide you're on the other side of reality from Alex Jones. Even in, I think right now, Texas is a little beneath his radar, but if he gets fixated on an issue, you're going to have trouble surviving in Texas and Republican politics if you cross Alex Jones.
So basically, Alex Jones is a much bigger story than who's going to be in the cabinet.
Oh yeah, and he's bigger than Breitbart. So he has more influence. He has a bigger audience. He's a much more dynamic and interesting personality. I mean, people have to read Breitbart. You don't have to read Alex Jones. You listen. So I think I mean, laugh now, but just wait.
Ross, what do you see?
I got nothing. I think we got a momentary disturbance in the force here, where we're going to find out in the next probably 6 or 8 months whether the Republican fealty to their party is stronger than Texas Republicans' hatred for the federal government. And I suspect they're going to end up hating the federal government, even though it's run by Republicans. But for a period here, they're going to like it, and they're going to be in a hopeful mode, as they are if you heard some of the earlier panels, that it's all going to be great when we get all of the stuff that we wanted. And right now there's a lot of, there's some of this is based on what the president-elect has said. Some of this is based on a lot of projection that people have put on him. If he was elected as a Republican, then we're going to get this, and we're going to get that, and we're going to get the other thing. When the particulars of that come down, they're going to find out, in particular what they got and what they didn't get. And I think that will, once again raise our Texas middle finger toward the federal government. But I think it's going to be a while. I think that's going to abate for a little bit. And in the meantime, we have, sort of a tight Texas budget. We don't have some would disagree with this. I don't think the legislature this time has a set of giant ideas. This isn't going to be one of those.
Unlike the past.
Well, it's not going to be one of those sessions where you come out and you say, that's the one when we created NASA or something. There's not a big idea animating this. There are a lot of problems.
Nothing like water, for example.
There are a lot of problems that they have to solve. There are a lot of fights that they're going to have. There are some shiny objects that they'll scream about, like bathrooms and things like that. But I don't see a big transformative thing happening this session. I think a lot of this is waiting to see what Washington does and then reacting to that.
Yeah, I want to move on and focus, get in the weeds of the legislature in a little bit. But Erica, you've been a close observer of Republican politics writ large, but a very close observer of Republican politics. So how do you see this affecting what's going on in the GOP in the state?
In my book from 2013, which you mentioned, I considered the question of whether Texas would turn blue. And I said Texas Democrats are not going to turn it blue, Texas Republicans will. I think that the effect of this election, the effect of Trump's presidency, will be to have a very energizing effect on Texas Democrats. And I think it should. I think in 2018 we're going to have elections. People think this is a joke, but I don't know why we're assuming we're going to have elections in 2020. In 2018, I hope Democrats contest every seat, even if they think they can't win it, because as Gromer said, there's this perception gap, right? If you think you're not going to win, so you don't compete to win, then you don't win, then you say, oh, we didn't win, of course we're never going to win, right? That's so self-defeating. The nation is facing a very difficult 4 or 8 years. The world is, the state definitely is. We have 2 layers of this. We have Alex Jones here. We have the only state with the Breitbart vertical itself. We have a governor, lieutenant governor, almost all of our state leadership having committed themselves to Trump, who is known to be a nativist, a racist, a misogynist, who's against NAFTA. If Trump proceeds with his plans to repeal NAFTA, which is actually the one policy position he's held consistently his entire life that I can tell, that's going to have a devastating effect on the state economy. Houston was already at risk of recession before Trump was elected. We're kind of, right now, as Ross says, in a bit of a bubble, or in a bit of a kind of bullish mood, I guess. I'm not sure it'll last past the year for the country, but I think Texas is going to be the first economy into the recession, if that's what hits. And so I think that everyone should just take this opportunity to store up the reserves, to rest up, and to get ready to fight in 2018.
Buy some dry
We'll need
goods.
that, yes.
Yeah. Well, let's then talk about the other side of that equation, though. I mean, given what you've said about the Democrats, Gromer's comments, we said we'd come back to him. We'll come back to him now. I think the conventional wisdom, and some of this is based really on what the data look like, is that the Democrats really do have some structural disadvantages in both party that are linked to party identification, turnout, organizational resources. I think it's one thing.
Or you could just say they're outnumbered.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, it's not just numbers. It's the fact it's candidate recruitment. It's all of these things that fall out of that to some degree.
Right.
But we did see the gap close this time by a pretty good amount. Is it enough? What are the mechanisms, I would say? Is it enough, and what are the mechanisms that might trigger some of the things you're talking about?
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
I want to say a word in defense of Texas Democrats, because this cycle actually, the gap was cut in half, basically. Romney won by 16 points in 2012. Trump won by 9.
Right.
You look at Harris County, the swing there, the swing in Fort Bend County, which is the county the Republicans are all obsessed with, that's pretty serious. And in Harris County especially, you see the down ballot success they had. We think about the top line results, and we look at maybe the congressional race that where Will Hurd, eked out re-election against Pete Gallego. But Democrats picked up seats in the House. They picked up judges' seats in Harris County. Where they competed, they did really, really well, and they won a lot of those races.
What did you just say, though?
Where they competed. Where they
and
competed. Where they competed.
And I think they need to maximize where they're strong, and that's in the urban areas, and start from there. And I wasn't slapping around Dallas County Democrats as much as I'm saying that there were opportunities there that were missed.
Right.
And for instance, in House District 105, which is always tough in presidential years, Rodney Anderson, and to his credit, managed to win. Although I think they're still
counting until Friday,
votes,
right?
Yeah.
But if Democrats focus on that race more, I mean, Linda Harper Brown almost lost in that seat several times. With the Trump effect, you would think that would be the first seat to fall. It wasn't. Matt Rinaldi won, I think, 50-49.
Yeah,
that
it's
came
really
out
close.
of nowhere, right?
Yeah, really close.
And Clinton won his district.
Clinton,
Yeah.
exactly. Hillary Clinton won that Northwest Dallas district. Astounding.
Yeah.
So if the party is prepared for that, and it's hard to say, okay, spend money on this race.
Especially if you don't have it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you have a plan and a strategy that said, we're going to compete in these areas where we see where we can be strong, and who knows, things can happen, then you have a situation like you did in 2008 when they were prepared for Obama's wave and picked up, I think, 4 House seats that year.
Right.
Lost them back in 10. But that year they came within one seat.
Yeah, it was
of
75,
of taking
76,
over
74 in
the
the House.
Texas House.
Right.
Incredible.
Yeah. 12 votes in Irving would have made a Democrat the Speaker.
So I think the lesson for Democrats, if you keep fighting, if you get the donors to put in the resources and stop, throwing money, outside of the state. I know it's glamorous to have fundraisers for out-of-town senators and all of that, but keep some of the money in Texas. And this is the most important thing: run quality candidates. Then you have a chance to rebuild quicker. If you don't, then you're going to always be in the wilderness.
Yeah, but that's not that's not statewide anytime soon.
It's not statewide, but
Yeah.
you can maximize where you're strong, and then who knows?
Right, but Democrats nationally are going to be in such terrible shape in 2 years that the money's going to go every place else but here. There's going to be no reason to spend money in Texas when you've got 10 senators defending and a party that's now a tiny minority in terms of governorships and I think it's still more interesting here what's happening to the Republicans, because I don't think anyone has any. If Trump had not won, you'd have Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz both running for president. So you'd have this sort of incredible dynamic in the state.
Abbott,
Yeah,
really?
I don't think you can be elected twice governor of Texas and not run for president. I'm serious. At that point, you're saying, well, I'm just, I have no ambition. I have
Well, it's
nothing.
N of 3.
And
Right, okay.
you're assuming that he wouldn't get a strong primary contest.
No, I think
Next
Dan
time
Patrick.
from a-
No, because I think Dan Patrick is in exactly the job he likes. Governor is removed from the scene. It's like you're not doing anything half the time. Dan Patrick wants to be there every day with 30 agenda items. The governor gets 5.
right.
He's taking
Yeah.
it back to the
You
Bullock,
agree with that, Ron?
from the Bob Bullock.
Yeah, I mean, he's going back to the Bullock thing. I mean,
Yeah.
why be governor if you can run the government from the corner? I mean, if you're over here and your main foil is not the governor, it's the House Speaker and the House. And, if he's the governor, when we talk about agendas right now, this was somewhat true 2 years ago, but it's certainly true now. When we talk about agendas, you have a general idea what Straus wants to do. He's not specific for all the reasons that he said this morning. You have a very specific list of things that Dan Patrick wants to do. He's basically presented a legislative program. It's like he's still a senator. He's got 30 bills ready to go, and some number of senators ready to file all of them that haven't already been filed. So he's basically, here's my agenda, specifically here's what I want to do. Greg Abbott has his book with 354 footnotes on how to amend the federal Constitution. That is an interesting idea, and it's a great intellectual exercise. But if you watch him pitch this, the last time that I saw him do this was at the Republican State Convention in Dallas. The stalwart Republicans, that place was packed with Cruz voters. The stalwart Republicans get lost somewhere down in the third or fourth amendment to the Constitution. They, like the Democrats, like term limits. They, like the Democrats, like balanced budget amendments, and then you lose them. So he's got that to sell, but it's not really a program that everybody's screaming about. Patrick's running things.
Well, he's going to have to invest a lot of capital to promote that. I mean, that's certainly what the polling shows.
A lot of what's happening-
And he might be able to turn it,
Yeah,
but
a
he's
lot of
going to have to lead it, I suspect.
I think a lot of what's going to happen in the session is either Patrick getting his way or Patrick not getting his way. I think, he's the guy who sets the table.
But he's also Trump's guy in Texas.
He's also, Patrick also, and he does as well, he keeps in close contact with the grassroots. I mean, even though he's a consummate insider, he's running things, he is just as popular with the grassroots Republicans out there than he was when he was a senator or a radio host.
I want to follow up on this and use it as a bridge to talk more specifically about the legislature. But, Gormer, you and I were talking in the green room a little bit about this. It's not green, and we saw some of this, I think, on the last panel through some of the shouting. But it's interesting, I think, to
Shouting
think
on a Texas
about
panel.
where...
That moderator, man.
I know, just weak. I was going to take a volunteer to do better. The question I think that's interesting right here that Senator Burton's kind of profile on that panel really raised to me is, how relevant is the Tea Party division going to be, and what is that going to look like? Is it really going to reveal itself to look like something maybe different that's just a little more factional, a little less ideological, or not? Because it seems to me it could turn either way depending on what the Trump presidency looks like. And I don't mean whether it looks apocalyptic, but really what kind of policy decisions does he make?
Can you summarize? I was at an appointment down south. So
Yeah, well, I mean, it's honestly,
drama that I
she was being very, Senator Burton was reticent to really, she had a very much a wait and see attitude on the president, depending on what he did.
Well, she was a major critic of Trump.
And there were intimations. She still was retaining her, I think, baseline criticism of the Republican Party as an institution. And it seems to me like what that division that we've become accustomed to, that panel was in a sense designed around, is going to look like remains to be seen, and a lot of it will depend on what the Trump government does.
Yeah, because I think the bottom line is Trump is not really a Tea Party guy, right?
Right, I don't think so. I mean,
He's not.
does that make sense to
So-
you?
Trump is actually, in some ways, oddly, I think on the same page as Dan Patrick as far as policy. And so Patrick also campaigned as the Tea Party outsider, the true conservative, et cetera. But Patrick is much more big government than we're used to for Texas than we were used to at the time. Much more populist. Has a similar background as far as being from the talk radio space, right? Trump is a TV guy. Patrick's a radio guy. Also, side note, I think you guys, I don't know why you guys think that Patrick doesn't want to be governor. Of course he wants to be governor.
I think he already is.
Yeah, but if you're officially governor, then you've got the platform of the governor. If you're a talk radio guy, you want to be the governor of Texas.
I'd rather
right?
set the Senate's agenda
But
than
if-
sign bills.
But,
do you think
but does he
Patrick-
see it that way?
Patrick, if he's the governor, would of course try to set the agenda for both the House and the Senate. That's not how the Constitution's structured.
Yeah, but who
what does
has
that
to
stop
listen? What compels him? He can compel them now. He can't compel them from the middle
He
office.
can compel the Senate. He can't compel the House, which frustrated him quite a bit last session.
One's better than none.
And he can't
He can
get
try.
he can't get an appointment. I mean, as maybe a vice presidential running mate or something like
Yeah,
that down
he
the
can
line.
run for president in 2020
Yeah,
or 2016,
exactly.
2024. As far as the division, then, I think that you have conservatives, and actually a lot of the sort of true conservative Tea Partiers, the phrase Tea Party, I think Senator Cruz stopped using the phrase Tea Party a year or two ago. He's been saying constitutional conservative. I think that was to me a sign that the phrase Tea Party is no longer how they're self-identifying. But I think that you'll see that there's this kind of conservative faction during the primary as voters in the legislature. People like Brandon Creighton, Jeff Leach, they were the ones who were most likely to defect from Trump, and they will be the ones most likely to stay in defection, I think, from Trump's plans, which we would assume to be more big government, almost progressive in some cases, more populist, more Keynesian, more Paul Krugman-like, and so on.
Right, infrastructure and all that. This is
Yeah.
this is kind of what I'm getting at. I think that this is why I think the Republicans are going to eventually, the Texas Republicans are going to peel away from this. You've got this. They share the impulse on throwing a brick through the window, but it's a different kind of brick. You know, this guy wants to throw red clay and this guy wants to throw adobe. It's a different thing, and you know, the things that they have in common got Trump elected, but I think the things that they don't have in common are going to split them back out. Dan Patrick's a different kind of
So he'll stay
politician
close to
than
Trump,
Donald Trump is.
Yeah, but Dan Patrick wants that access. He wants to be the guy who, when Trump comes to Texas, he's the one who's by his side.
Right.
And with the exception of women's privacy, which I don't think Donald Trump cares about in any sense.
Doesn't seem to. I mean,
No. So I think that's not an issue.
Alex Jones doesn't care about it.
Well, yeah.
We can go a lot of places there.
But the point is that that's an issue where I think they part company. But I think Dan Patrick's got a real instinct for power.
Yes.
And the instinct for power doesn't take him into a bloodbath with Greg Abbott. It takes him into a partnership with Donald Trump.
I agree with that. And the question would be then, does Governor Abbott have the wherewithal to stand up to Patrick? And based on last session, I would say no.
Well, although it may not be a matter of standing up, I mean, it may be a matter of doing what governors do, which is maneuver around those things.
I mean, Abbott tweets like Patrick, but governs like Strauss.
He-
I mean, if he could have Strauss's agenda, like 100%, he would just say, okay, fine, that's great, and then he would throw in some tweets about, you know, sanctuary cities.
Jade Helm.
But he doesn't want any of that. He doesn't want to alienate the
Right.
business community. He doesn't want to do anything that's not basically.
Before we spiral off too far into people's ambitions, which I think is interesting, but we can do for a while. What does the impact of this dynamic have on the session coming up, though? I mean, you know, it seems to me we've heard today fairly broad consensus that they're going to spend some money to solve the CPS thing, and they want to do it pretty quickly.
Right.
Makes sense. You know, let's just stipulate they've got to do the budget.
Well, I think they're going to,
You know,
Donna,
then what?
Donna Howard had this right, I think. I think a lot of this is response to headlines.
She's still here.
Yeah, she's still here. 10
You just
or
said she was right with her in the room, Ross.
I forget the year. It was 10 or 12 years ago, we had a big crisis in CPS and adult protective services. And the legislature jumped up and said, we're going to solve this, and kind of calmed it down to the point where it was no longer a headline, and it wasn't blowing up in the same way. And now it's blown up again. They've been redlining these agencies and not giving them, if you listen to Charles Smith, he says, I need $400 million and 1,300 people. That's something that was written into the last budget and the budget before that and the budget before that. They built what they're reaping now. So now it's become a big headline, it's become a big crisis, they're going to have to solve it. But there are a bunch of other things that are like that just haven't blown up. And the question is whether they ever get to those kinds of things. And the answer, if you watch the Texas legislature over time, is not until they blow up.
Until they have to, right?
So, when you look at the budget this time, you look at it's a relatively tight revenue stream. They have no cash to begin with that they're not going to use for the supplemental bill to start. And they've got a group of Republicans, Betancourt is a good example of them, who want a bunch of new tax cuts, which is in the parlance of state government, that's a spending item. That's a minus on the state budget. So I think that's going to be a central fight.
Are you shaking your head at tax cuts, Erica?
At the spending version of more property tax relief, I mean, Betancourt, I guess, said that again. Yeah, that's ridiculous. I'm thankful that he won't have the money in the budget to do that this time around. I own property in Travis County. I pay a pretty high tax rate. I think it is disgraceful that I got property tax relief when there are kids sleeping in state offices that are under state care. I'm not the person who needs help from the state. And it makes me, it's just a shameful, disgraceful failure of leadership that happened last session. And if they're talking about doing it again.
So, stipulating, I think, that they're going to do something about CPS and they're probably going to spend some money on it. Right. I want to go to the other big thing that seems to be percolating here and seems to be generating this House, this House-Senate Strauss-Patrick division, and that's obviously education, public ed. So, how do you guys read the potential for what would seem to have to be some kind of grand deal in terms of both reorganizing school finance, which House members are talking a pretty good fight on, and the priority given some kind of a choice or voucher program that's such a high priority lieutenant governor. Is there the stuff of a deal there or not?
I don't know if you can get the the rural Republicans in the House to come around on vouchers. In large measure, they're looking at they look at this a little bit differently. They don't have a private school that their kids could go to anyway. The public school in a lot of rural communities is the center of the community. It's not just the daylong Bobcats. It's the gym is where they have community events. It's a centerpiece of the community, and they don't like anything they regard as an attack on it. And they just don't have the political will at home to drive their members in the House and to some extent in the Senate to do that. They've never been able to get over that. The Senate's passed a bill a couple of times. It's not passed a bill a couple of times. This one's a really dug-in, hard fight.
Jonathan, did you read of the lieutenant governor suggest that he's willing to make a deal on this and that he would go along with the school finance?
If he got
Reorg.
what he could consider a big victory on choice and charters, I mean, I think he needs something to, and that's going to be such a big thing out of the education department now, out of Washington,
Right.
that he's going to be imbued with that as being let's be the
Laboratory
yeah,
of choice.
right.
Yeah.
So I don't I think that's his priority, and he'd have to get what he thought was a pretty significant victory there to.
It's one of the issues where you're right, Trump is setting the tone in Washington as well. And Patrick also has other members of the Senate, including Huff Hines of Dallas and some others, who are very choice. They want choice charters, all of that. So I don't know, because of that, if you can get a grand deal with the House and the Senate. I just don't think it's possible.
I think the House Republicans, the rural Republicans you mentioned, are going to be strong on this, as will the Democrats. One of the representatives I'd be watching closely if I was covering the session and working on Best and Worst would be Drew Springer from West Texas. I mean, he's a very strong supporter of public schools. At TribFest this year, he was saying he's not going to support vouchers. I mean, he just refused to do it flatly. The school in his district in Guthrie is quite good, actually. It's one of the best in the state. So he'll be a strong voice in this, and others like him will be as well. The issue, I think, or the challenge, like what will, I mean, I'm going to aim this to those of you who are in the legislature. There's one way the lieutenant governor can trigger a special session by not passing a budget out of the Senate. It's a Senate budget year. He was willing to not pass a budget out of the Senate last session if he didn't get property tax relief. So as Jonathan says, I think that he'll be willing to make a grand deal if it includes what he wants, vouchers. That being the case, what I would do, which is what I've been doing, I think, for 4 years as a journalist, is try to focus on harm reduction, damage control, mitigate the risk to the state, to the kids. Voucher programs can be designed, some are better than others, right? Jim Leininger had one 10 years ago in San Antonio, in Edgewood. That was a good program because it targeted kids who were actually at risk, kids who were in poverty, kids who were in need. The funding for it came from Leininger and other donors, so it was private funding. But with those kids, they were kids who actually did need the help. They weren't upper middle class kids whose parents wanted a government subsidy for existing. And then those kids got into private schools, parochial schools. In addition to the fact that those kids needed the help, it also was a better data set and a better argument for vouchers. If you look at the results of that program, you say that was an experiment that was worthwhile, that showed the effects of vouchers. So I would say to Democrats, Republicans, people who are looking at the fact that Patrick wants to pursue this and is going to make it a priority with the backing of Trump and Trump's education secretary, to try to steer him to making a program that's well designed to actually target kids who are in need. That's the way that would be least harmful to the state and public schools.
There might be something to that in terms of that being the bare minimum experiment he could get that could be part of a deal, theoretically.
Right.
But they still have to find the money.
The other platform for a deal, if they're willing to go there, is the way they have always lowered property taxes in the past is by raising state funding. It's a waterbed. And you had a moment 10 years ago, right after they passed the 2006 franchise tax thing in school finance, where the state and the local governments were each paying about 45% of the cost of school. Federal government was paying about 10%. Feds still pay about 10%. The local is down to, depending on which numbers you use, either 42% or 38%, but it's gone like that. If you want the local property taxes to go back down, you increase the state amount. Or you cut spending to schools. And they tried cutting spending in 2011, and voters didn't like that very much. So if they want to come in and make a grand deal, you can have your property tax relief, but we have to spend a little bit more money on schools. Maybe we get that from here or here or here, and that's another fight.
Gromer, how do you assess you cover politics in a big city with a lot of sports teams and public events, and I'm sorry to give this to you. You're smiling, I don't mean this in a mean way. How do you assess this fight between the emphasis from the Lieutenant Governor's office and from some corners of the state on this transgender bathroom legislation versus economic development, and that is a fight? And I'm not to say that there's not a civil rights issue there either, but clearly the discourse right now, the messaging in Texas has been the bill versus economic development costs, to my mind.
Right, yeah. I don't know. It seems like one of those issues that defines sort of the Texas legislature, right? I mean, you got people waving signs, don't go there, but they're going to go there anyway. And we'll have to see how the debate plays out, because, there's some Republican lawmakers that have been talking about this since the issue sprang up for months, and they're dead set on passing something. And it may be a situation where you get some watered down something that says nothing, right? Just to mollify those guys. But yeah, definitely there's a chance of some sort of economic blowback. We've seen it in
Maybe some kind of opt-in, opt-out.
Yeah.
How do you read?
It was a debacle for Pence, huh? I mean, his career was over. And I think
North Carolina.
well, yeah. I mean, I think for Patrick, you have to have a good fight with a religious overtone in order to feel good about yourself
And you
to
just
feel
said
like
a good fight. And then
right. And I think
put up the good fight
Abbott
at the end,
Abbott wants no part of it. So I think the point is I don't know whether this is just something to rally the troops. And again, this is something where this will be the unique issue where he's not going to have Trump rally
yeah,
to
who
his
cares?
side.
Nothing
Yeah,
about that. But you're going to have that, bathroom bill. You're going to have more abortion bills. You would think that there's nothing left, but there's actually a couple of bills that have already been filed.
Yeah, the burial and cremation,
Burial and
fetal
cremation,
tissue. And
yeah,
right.
exactly.
Right.
So it's just not the bathroom bill. You're going to have a lot of bills like
Right.
that where they're going to have big fights over, and
Socialist
we'll see how it
United
goes.
State
Exactly.
affairs.
Sanctuary cities,
Yeah.
where Trump, they will have backing
Yeah.
from Trump, but sanctuary cities.
No, that's irresistible. That issue has to, and with
So-
Austin as your foil.
Yeah.
So how do you assess, Ross, you watch the inside politics of the chambers pretty closely. Is there a little bit of fatigue among the House leadership in taking the bullets for for bills like this?
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah, if you talk to, you guys know this because you talk to the trade groups and to the lobby already. There's a proxy war that's been going on for a while with, Patrick in the Senate and the people with him in the Senate saying, basically, if you're either for us or against us on this stuff, specifically the bathroom bill and school choice, and to some extent property taxes. And telling business groups that if you're not declared, you're against us. And then Straus telling the same groups, look, don't come to us with your fights from the Senate. Don't come to us expecting us to be the brake and the Senate to be the accelerator. We're not here to catch everything they do. Go lobby the Senate. Here's what happens in the House. If you take something like the bathroom bill, if you look at the polling, the polling that we did, University of Texas, Texas Tribune poll, Republican voters are solidly on Patrick's side on this transgender bathroom issue. Depending on how you phrase it and how you do it, he knows his voters. But you've got groups like Texas Competes, which is, vaguely under the rubric of the Texas Association of Business. It's a lot of big brands that brand names that have lined up and basically said we don't want any laws that discriminate against this community. They didn't say specifically we're against the bathroom bill, but we don't want laws that discriminate against this community. And then you look at North Carolina, which is everybody's sort of canary in the coal mine right now, where McCrory lost by 6,000 votes and is contending it. But the governor there took the Patrick side on a similar bill there. The NCAA canceled a tournament. PayPal canceled plans for a big expansion there.
The
There was an
canary
economic
croaked.
development effect.
The
So-
canary croaked.
So
Yeah.
I'm a House member, I'm a Republican House member, and I look at this and I say, my voters are there, my businesses are there, don't make me vote on this. So yeah, I think there's a lot of worried.
It's
people
interesting
over
though, North Carolina went going through sports boycotts. But it's interesting that Patrick and all those guys saying, well, bring it on, we're not concerned about that. And so I wonder, Jerry Jones and company,
Well, they probably can't do it in time to mess up the Super Bowl in Patrick's hometown, but they could do it in time to mess up the NCAA men's tournament in 2018 in
Joe
Straus's
Straus's
hometown.
yeah.
So, commence.
How do you see that shaking out? I mean, you agree with that, Erica?
Oh, the intellectual dishonesty of this is just nauseating, right? Like the Women's Privacy Act. I mean, yeah, that is clearly a paramount concern. Women's safety is a huge issue for Dan Patrick.
It's now the Women's Privacy Act, right?
Yeah. Women's privacy, women's safety. I think sanctuary cities. I live in East Austin. Sanctuary city policies in Austin make me safer. So if I'm going to hear a statewide official talk about women's safety and privacy, don't pass sanctuary cities, and bathroom bills aren't going to do anything to help me. It's just ridiculous. But again, since we're in this terrible, listening to this panel, I'm so glad I'm not going to cover this session. My preview is you're going to have a terrible time, covering this garbage fire. I'm sorry, man. If you guys need a break, just come over to the east side and hang out with me. But I think that South Dakota had a similar bill passed through its legislature, assembly, or whatever they call it, and the governor, Republican, vetoed the bill with a veto statement that I thought was the perfect articulation of the issue from a conservative point of view. He said, this is definitively an issue of local control. Our schools, our superintendents, our principals, our teachers, our parents, our families can decide for themselves what the needs of their school are and what the best way to promote the safety and well-being of all the children in their school is. And I don't think he's gotten any backlash for it because it was just such a reasonable, sensible, sane way to approach the issue. As you say, polling has shown that this is an issue a lot of Republicans, and I think a lot of Democrats too, that respond to strongly. You talk to people, dads don't let, you see a dad out with his child, he has to clear the men's room to make sure she can go in there, or he asks a woman to take his daughter into the women's bathroom because he doesn't want his daughter being exposed to men in the bathroom.
Lots of logistical problems.
Yeah.
when you start
You're also
thinking
polling
about
him on
it.
something most people have never really thought much about.
Yeah, and I think at the instinctive level, it's you have this picture of I don't know. It's still new terrain. People are getting their heads around it. But I think that the South Dakota governor, his veto statement's online. It's a great statement. It really I think correctly, insanely, and rationally says, let the schools decide for themselves, let businesses decide for themselves. They can make this decision competently by themselves. Or alternatively, at schools, if there's going to be a push, if Patrick is going to insist on this, then I would say try to look for, again, some kind of harm reduction strategy where you think about a bill that says maybe in a school you have to have the girls' locker room, the boys' locker room, and one single occupancy locker room for anybody whose dignity requires the privacy of a single occupancy space, right? For whatever reason that might be, maybe they're just shy.
That winds up presupposing a desire to solve the problem, address the problem on its own.
I'm so naive about these things.
Right. So I would point out. I think it's interesting that you brought up sanctuary cities because it really does. Sanctuary cities is one of the more recent things in recent memory where you started getting momentum for something in the legislature. I want to say 2009, and all of a sudden, Bob Perry, the Butt family, all of a sudden people came out from the Republican business community and said, hey, we don't want this. And I think they did it reluctantly.
Yeah.
Right.
And it does seem to me like we're going to see that dynamic again.
Well, they were
but this is
following
a different
police
kind of
to
issue.
her argument.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a different
Right.
kind of issue. So I think with that, we're going to pause and take questions. You have microphones. And please, I should have said this last time, no offense to anybody, directly to the question if you could, rather than long statement, short rhetorical question. Thank you.
Asking for a friend.
Not to violate the First Amendment. Please, over here.
Yes, I'll try to keep it super quick. Texas, like the rest of the country, is having a severe housing crisis. That's the most severe for people at the bottom end of the income ladder. That like 80% of people who are under 30% of median family income pay more than half of their income in housing costs. And I'm wondering why the media spends so little time discussing housing. It intersects with everything, with educational outcomes, with medical outcomes. Why is housing so unsexy for the media?
Why don't you guys write about housing? You've been an assignment editor, sort of.
Yeah, part of it, the reason is that we write about politics, and the issues that we write about are the ones that drive politics. So it's the sort of, if it's a perfect system, and it's not, it's the issues that percolate up for debate in that pink building over there and in city halls and stuff. And housing very rarely does that. It's also, this is a general kind of truism about the media. Things that percolate very slowly and don't have an event around them tend to get less covered. And that's a failing of the media, and it's something we need to pay attention to. But housing's a classic thing that happens very slowly, and suddenly you notice that half your community can't afford to live in your city limits.
Maybe on a statewide level, you don't see a lot of stories, but on a local level,
that's true.
You do see stories, particularly about affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing, and the impact on the economy, especially in Dallas. And part of the problem in Dallas is there's not enough affordable housing.
It's kind of harder for local coverage to coalesce
Exactly,
into driving the agenda, though, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
We're
So-
doing some local coverage on that too. So yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Locally, yes.
Locally, but you're right, from a statewide and national level, there needs to be more.
Sir.
Yeah, what is your assessment of the environment in Texas for the National Popular Vote Act?
So kill the Electoral College?
Right.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I think Republicans are against it and Democrats are for it.
Right. You know what's interesting about that though is if you did kill the Electoral College, you would have more action, I think, in Texas and New York and California, and it would be interesting to see the campaigns land there, not just to win those states, but to get the votes, gin up their bases, and pull enough votes out of those states. Wyoming, no, still no one goes to Wyoming, but yeah, interesting. But I don't think that will be an issue anytime soon.
I would keep an eye on I would keep an eye on it though, and I would keep a list of the comments coming out now about people defending the Electoral College in Texas, Republicans, because when Texas does turn blue in a presidential cycle, which will be pretty soon, there's no pathway under the current configuration to the White House for a Republican presidential nominee. So the same, the state that's causing them to be such strong defenders of the Electoral College system right now, that might change. And I think also an interesting trend we've seen as far as the bills filed have been some things like Raphael and Shia filed a bill about open primaries. We're seeing more bills filed by Representative Israel from Austin, Representative Bond did some work with this last session on voter registration, expanding access to the vote. So I think that there's certainly, I think, maybe more interest in these issues than would appear at the surface glance.
Sir.
David Enolis with IDRA in San Antonio. There's also oftentimes a lot of stories about the sleeping giant, right, the Latino and voting. But when you look at the past history, of course, this is a state when it had a larger percentage of white voters voting people like Ann Richards and state Supreme Court justices, which with much larger percentages of white voters, that happened. So what do you see as the biggest challenges in trying to change white voter attitudes today?
White voter attitudes in the sense of getting more
Yeah,
white
because
voters
white
to
voter
vote
attitudes
Democratic.
Used to vote
Right.
for more liberal
Right.
people, but now they tend, as a whole, to vote
In other words,
much more
what is the
conservative,
potential
even
for
alt-right.
change in the patterns, the lopsided pattern in white voting?
Well, yeah, Donna is still here. I think there are 4 white lawmakers in the House now. 1 woman, 3 men. Is that correct?
Democratic one.
Democratic. That's
Democratic,
what I mean. Democratic. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's many.
That was nearly news.
Yeah, it was. I talked to Gary Morrow a lot about this, a former land commissioner who was Clinton's director here in Texas, and he says that Democrats have forgotten how to talk to the average white voter, the small town voter, and there used to be a coalition between small town white voters, the Democrats, the Democratic courthouses there, and urban voters, and you stitch together that coalition. But to answer your, I don't know what the answer is, because I think one of the problems for Democrats is that the party, right or wrong, is being perceived in a lot of places as a party of minorities. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and I think that's somehow chases away a lot of white voters, if that makes any sense. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Absolutely.
the parties are being defined that way, and there used to be a time when you had like a Sam Nunn in Georgia, a conservative Democrat, and there was a little difference between a conservative Democrat and a conservative Republican.
And that's pretty much
You,
over.
you
Yeah,
need,
that's
you
all
need
over.
candidates who are less appealing to Rachel Maddow. Because that's the constituency for Wendy Davis was MSNBC. If you watched that, you thought she was about to be elected governor.
Right.
Well, what this underlines is, I think, is that there are other things going on here with urbanization and
Right.
especially education, right? The gap between college and non-educated.
I mean, that's
college
why
educated.
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
The Black Jeopardy skit,
Really got
Yeah,
it.
it's
right?
great.
Yeah.
Right.
On Saturday, if you haven't
Right.
seen the Black
It's a
Jeopardy
Saturday-
skit on Saturday Night Live from
great.
about
Yes.
3 weeks ago, it's on their website.
So we saw a really increased level of hostility toward the mainstream media this last election. I believe you said you were on the campaign, so
Right.
you probably personally experienced that. Very distressing, by the way, for me. Are you seeing any of that from citizens of Texas towards what's perceived as the Texas mainstream media?
Not in the
Yeah.
yeah, but not in the violent way that
Not like violent.
know,
They don't want to
yeah, I mean,
kill us or anything.
whoa, whoa.
No, I
Maybe.
found Tea Party people more suspicious than Trump people. Trump people are into good times and celebrity, and talking to a reporter or being on camera is all part of what it's about.
right.
When I say yes, there's a deep distrust and of the media out there, really by everyone, I would think, but particularly by conservatives. It's like when you talk to voters, conservative voters, and you tell them where you know who you work for, it's automatically yeah, and then they eventually talk to you, but it starts out really a real distrust there.
Right.
It's
Erica,
like-
you've had a lot of experience with this on social media.
I was attacked every day the past 4 years, usually just verbal attacks. Occasionally, those attacks came from people in power, wielding the power of the state. Occasionally, as you know, Jim, from 2015, they came from people who are known for their interest in constitutional carry, people who are enthusiasts about guns, who know where I live and can find me in public pretty easily. So yeah, that's been there all the time. And you know, I think that if you know any journalists who are political journalists, like just make sure you're keeping an eye out for them and have their back, because they will be attacked continuously the next 4 or 8 years.
Yeah.
My question is about all the talk about people being in their own bubble and their own little world, especially on social networks like Facebook. So my question to each one of you is, barring the Texas Tribune, what other sources of information for the public do you think would be valid so that we can get a full picture of what is going on in our world, both sides? If you can give us maybe 2 sources, and the other part of the question is, how does social networks like Facebook, how does it steer what you give to the public? Or does it have any bearing whatsoever about what people talk about on social network compared to what you guys deliver to us? Because we're seeing 2 different worlds. The stuff you give us and the stuff we talk amongst our own group with.
Well, I think to begin with, everybody in this room should get a subscription, whether online or print, to your local newspaper and the Dallas Morning News. You start there. But seriously, you should read wherever you're from, read your local newspaper and listen to your local newscast. That's a start, I think. Because people don't do that. What's scary is that people now just look at their Facebook feeds and get their news from there, which is really, really scary considering the fake news that's on there.
Jonathan, you're
But I
very
would start there.
polyglot in the way that you do first reading. How do you handle a question like that?
I don't know. I try to, as much as I can, read stuff from places that I wouldn't necessarily like where they're coming from or agree with them. And just because, I think you're constantly astonished by how once you get into someone else's mindset, it all makes sense. And I think that's the problem with this social media stuff, is people are so totally, it just locks people in the way that your cable choices lock you in. But it's even more pernicious with people, you know, after the Trump thing, people just saying, I don't want to be your friend. I don't want to hear about you. I don't want to know you exist. And that's ridiculous. That's sick.
Yeah, Facebook's like that string of fast food restaurants that's in every town. This is like a dietary thing, right? You have to figure out how to get a balanced bit of information. And if you're just reading Facebook, you're probably getting the worst of both sides. And eventually you become kind of a fathead. And I think we're seeing that a lot. You know, but one of the things, you know, to your question, when you're having an argument with somebody who's friendly enough that you can still talk to them after the argument, ask them what they read. And then go start reading them and figure out where they are and look at this stuff and say, you know, it's like Erica was saying about school choice. You may be sort of reflexively against school choice or reflexively for school choice, but you ought to go read up on it and see what it's really about and see what the arguments really are and what the real problems are. It might change your mind. It might just open you up a little bit so that you know where the other side's coming from without changing your mind. You have to go where, you have to sort of force yourself to go places for information that you weren't going casually.
And I would add to all these suggestions are great. I think, you know, as journalists, we of course read a lot of an unusual variety of sources, I think. But one thing I think that I do on Twitter that could be done on Facebook also, although Twitter is even easier because you can talk to strangers or you hear from strangers, is during the primary and during the general, I try to have like a sort of curated like mini collection of people who support different candidates, who I like, who seem like kind of nice people, sensible, polite, civil, decent, fair-minded. So even if I don't agree with them, then I'm kind of getting little like burbles from this person who, this guy likes, you know, Huckabee, this guy likes Ben Carson, like this person likes Bernie Sanders. And so just kind of have, like, to have the exposure, which you can get through travel too, but if you're not traveling as much, we live in a city like Austin, which is kind of a blue bubble, just so you kind of have recurring reminders of the humanity behind all people, including Trump supporters, although perhaps not Trump himself.
You know, I mean, there's an interesting structural thing there, is that what all of those things take is effort.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And what the new forms of media that people are so concerned about is that they take no effort.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the real dilemma that we're tangling with here. And it's also one of the things that probably is feeding, you know, that is driven a little bit by these differences that are being generated by education levels to some degree.
Well, and to some extent, it's that old Amazon thing. Remember when you first started Amazon and you bought a book and it said, well, if you liked this, then you'll like this. That's how they make their selection tracks.
And it's
like if you get more and more concentrated.
Okay, last question, sir. Thank you for waiting.
I suggest that we and you in the media deal with these fake media stuff, not just on Facebook. I belong to about 7 email lists that all come from the right wing. I know what our side thinks, but you know, how do you suggest you and, you know, in the real media like you represent, and the fake things out of Macedonia, how you and we deal with those?
One thing I would say from I guess I was in journalism for 10 years total, and I learned from talking to sources, is that somebody who's telling you the truth will never get defensive when you question them about their sources or information. They might say, I can't tell you how I know that, or it's an off-the-record source, but they won't object to you wanting to know where your information came from. They'll actually probably be pretty supportive of that. So when I look at people who are having discussion, you know, someone like you wrote about today, Jonathan, in first reading, Greg Williams, and sort of, here's this claim from Alex Jones that 3 million illegals voted, and then kind of, and the people, you know, the media is only objecting to this claim because they don't want you to know the truth. You know, that's the kind of defensive attitude that to me is always a warning sign, whether I'm talking to a source or reading news. Because people who have good information don't mind backing it up, you know? That's kind of a quick tip I use to see if I can feel confident about who I'm talking to.
Be a skeptic. There's an famous old newsroom slogan, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Really, be seriously skeptical about everything you read. And when you read something that you go, that just sort of, that just feels good, that's probably, you know, that's probably a sign that you really need to check it. This really comports with what I like, you know, just be skeptical.
Gromer Jeffers, Jonathan Tylove, Ross Ramsey, Erica Greeter. A report from the Real Media. Thank you very much, guys. And thank you all very much for coming, for your great questions. Have a good day. I think Evan's going to...
Yeah, thank you all. Let me echo Jim. Thank you so much for sticking with us all day. Wonderful to have you here.